Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem garnered incredible success for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise, and now, 1 year later, its spin-off series, Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, is out on Paramount+. This 12-episode series marks the 5th TMNT animated show in the franchise. All 4 of the previous series are legendary in their own right, each bringing something unique and impactful to the table. But does Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have what it takes to live up to this legacy? Let's get into it. This series is broken up into 2 main story arcs, with the first following Bishop and her Mechazoids, and the second following the East River 3 and their heist of the Jersey Bite. The first story was the one shown the most in promotional material, so I already had a pretty good idea of how it was going to play out. One of my minor issues with Mutant Mayhem was the fact that the Turtles were together for the entire duration of the movie, which meant we only got a sense of their individual personalities on a very basic level. This series does the exact opposite by separating the Turtles so they each go on their own little adventure, which is exactly what the series needed to do. Episode 1, Leonardo Stands Alone, follows Leo's efforts to find April and track Donnie's location, all while being chased by a killer robot. This episode kicks off the story very nicely, maintaining a little bit of mystery as to what really happened, which ties into Leo's panic very well. And of course, April is a big part of this episode, which is an absolute delight to see. April is my favorite character in this version of TMNT, and she continues to be funny and endearing like she is in Mutant Mayhem.
Let's just hope it doesn't find a big bowl of rice, because it's wet, like when you drop your phone in water, or you know what, never mind.
I also love the way she played off of Leo specifically. Their banter was really enjoyable and a nice change of pace from his tireless simping from the film.
Are you throwing books at it? What, do you think it's gonna read up on being nicer?
Oh, sorry, maybe I wasn't expecting to fight robots.
Honestly, this episode made me enjoy the potential of them getting together more because it feels like their relationship has more substance now. They can tease each other, but also have genuine moments like April reassuring him that he can do this. I also adore how April helps Leo out from the sidelines during the actual fight with the Mechazoid. Even if fighting isn't her thing, she still helps out in whatever way she can. And of course, we continue to see Leo being a bit of a dork, which is endearing and my favorite part of his characterization.
I think a healthy debate could open up your mind to a series of possibilities you've maybe never considered before.
Episode 2, Mikey Does the Right Thing, introduces us to Rod, the Nepo baby intern. Rod actually reminds me of Timothy from the 2012 animated series, which is likely somewhat intentional, with Rod wanting to be turned into a mutant and the reference to Mutagen Man.
Why am I not Mutagen Man?
I'll talk about this a bit later when we get to episode 8, but Mikey really doesn't stand out to me in this universe. However, the way he and Rod play off of one another is really fun in this episode, and seeing them try to pull off this ridiculous heist is really enjoyable.
It's too irresponsible. Leo always says,
I'll throw in $1 million.
I'm in.
But Mikey also loses points for injecting Rod with random animal blood. Hey Mikey, I feel like it's pretty common knowledge that blood-borne illnesses are really bad. One last thing that I'll mention for this episode is that they did a great job foreshadowing the Mechazoids turning on humanity by showing them honing in on Rod's eyes as mutation. It's just a nice little detail. Episode 3, Raph Thinks It Through, is one of my favorites from the Mechazoid arc. For one, I love this version of Raphael. He's a great mix of various versions of Raph from throughout the franchise. But I especially enjoyed how they severely limited his ability to fight by giving him broken ribs. It forced him to slow down and approach the situation differently than his typical gung-ho, fight everything attitude. However, my favorite part of this episode is the introduction of the Purple Dragons. I absolutely adore Angel in the IDW comics and Kendra from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Angel in this show feels like a perfect blend of both of their personalities paired with a really solid character design. Han is approached very differently than in other iterations, which initially took me aback, but I find him pretty enjoyable too. He and Raph bonding over feeling like they aren't strong enough to protect the people they care about was a really sweet moment. I'm also really curious about what they're going to do with Kitsune as the Purple Dragon's leader. It doesn't seem like she's meant to be a reinterpretation of Kitsune from the IDW comics, but who knows. Episode 4, Donnie Hangs Tough, really starts giving us more insight into Bishop. She and Donnie have really great dialogue back and forth, and we start to see potential cracks in her motivation when Donnie calls her out for threatening innocent lives to kill off one mutant. I'm also a sucker for a good train sequence, and this one was really enjoyable to watch. Donnie's character benefited the most from this series, and we learned a lot about him from this episode alone. His insecurity and feeling inadequate is made apparent by the fact that in everyone else's flashbacks, their narratives mock the other three turtles, while Donnie's is his brothers insulting him for being useless. The absence of Donnie knowing how to code or having general technical knowledge in Mutant Mayhem was really disappointing, so seeing them finally incorporate that into his character through this series was really exciting. He also has some really fun lines in this episode that make him stand out even more as a really fun version of Donatello.
I'm sorry, is my existential struggle for survival messing with your social calendar? Do you need to reschedule?
The format of the first 4 episodes is extremely enjoyable, with each turtle's flashback to the events at the shipyard having a unique visual style. Donnie's video game recap was my personal favorite of the bunch. I also love how they each used one of their brothers' mindsets to help get them through the challenge they were facing. Leo tries to think like Donnie and asks April to help track him, Mikey acts like Leo by trying to formulate an effective plan, Raph starts telling jokes like Mikey to buy himself some time, and Donnie takes a page out of Raph's book going beast mode. It's a fun and really sweet way to tie them all together despite being separated from one another. Episode 5, Bishop Makes Her Move, is where we get a solid understanding of the Mechazoid arc's main antagonist, Josefina Bishop, a woman who's dedicated her life to robotics in honor of her sister Elena. I absolutely adore this version of Bishop. A little known fact about me is that my favorite antagonist in the entire Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise is Bishop and the EPF, specifically his original incarnation from the 2003 animated series, and he hasn't really been adapted into many other TMNT universes. The 2012 version of Bishop in particular is very disappointing to me because he's an ally for the Turtles and is literally an alien, which is the very thing he hates more than anything in other incarnations. I think they wanted to do something fresh and unique with the character, which I am all for, but it didn't really work out for 2012 Bishop. Tales of the TMNT Bishop, on the other hand, is the perfect balance of old and new in terms of personality and motive. As much as I love 2003 Bishop, the reason he's such a good enemy for the Turtles is that he's a terrible human being that doesn't ever try to be redeemable. I mean, that's if we ignore Fast Forward, but I more specifically mean the role that he plays in the main 2003 storyline. Tails Bishop instead has a backstory that makes us as the audience empathize with her. She's trying to change the world for the better, but is being funded by an apathetic investor. Her life's work was destroyed in an instant by mutants, which twisted her goal into saving the world by eradicating mutants. Beyond her backstory, Bishop is set up for a really interesting arc in episode 6, with her anti-mutant agenda being challenged by the Turtles saving her and made apparent by her willingness to turn herself in. However, the EPF reassuring her that mutants do in fact need to be eradicated and offering her the opportunity to continue that mission pulls her back to the dark side. This back and forth is really compelling and lays the groundwork for her to potentially redeem herself or fall even deeper into her hatred for mutants and become completely irredeemable. Both of which would be very fun character arcs for her. And of course, the EPF is one of my favorite things in the franchise, so seeing them incorporated into this universe was my favorite moment in the entire series. The rest of episode 6, Night of the Mechazoids, is the satisfying conclusion to the story that's been built up for the last 5 episodes. Like I just mentioned, the Mechazoids' betrayal leads Bishop to question her beliefs, which is always fun to see. Something I haven't mentioned that the series does really well throughout is its gorgeous animation. They did a phenomenal job of translating the same energy of Mutant Mayhem's art style into 2D animation, and the fight sequences especially are phenomenal. As a result, the factory confrontation fight is great both narratively and visually. And of course, this episode introduces us to Metalhead, who is absolutely delightful. He's such a sweetheart, and I really hope they bring him back at some point because he's fantastic. With the EPF tease at the end of this arc, and its brief acknowledgement in episode 11, they seem to be setting up a big new antagonist for this universe, which is a very exciting development. I thoroughly enjoyed the Mechazoid storyline, but it's time to get into the second half of the series, The Pearl. Episode 7, Raph vs. Water, is our setup for the second arc, and this time when the Turtles are separated, they are accompanied by the Mutanimals. Which, before we get any further, I need to talk about the Mutanimals and Scumbug, because ever since watching Mutant Mayhem, there's been a couple things that have been bothering me. Number one is the fact that the Mutanimals were mutated around the same time as the Turtles and are depicted as babies, which means they'd be around 15 years old as well, which makes Splinter getting with Scumbug really weird. And number two, the fact that they refer to the Mutanimals as the Turtles' cousins would make Splinter Scumbug's uncle, which is also weird. Tales of the TMNT addresses both of these issues, making one of them better and the other one potentially worse.
They're older than we are.
You need to set a good example for your cousins.
I'm just gonna continue to tell myself that when they say cousins, they mean it in the found family sense, and that that's how they refer to all mutants in this universe, just to spare myself any more suffering. But getting back to episode 7, it's mostly just setup for this arc, so I don't find it particularly interesting. I do really enjoy how we get to see Raph's anger highlighted here by him throwing a tantrum at the start, but otherwise nothing stands out. I'm not a fan of the anemones, their voices annoy me, and the bit of them talking like commercials gets old really fast. Ray Fillet also gets reduced to only saying his name, or yay Fillet, or okay Fillet, which is also really annoying. Episode 8, Mikey Takes Charge, is probably the episode that gives Mikey the most personality he's ever had in this universe, which unfortunately isn't saying much. Him being completely oblivious to the fact that the purple dragons are robbing the store leaned into him being a lovable idiot.
And some salt and vinegar chips for Leah. Wait, are you robbing this place?
Plus his constant teasing of Lee lent itself to some pretty funny moments.
It wasn't cool for me to laugh at your name.
Wait, are we being serious for a moment? Because that actually means a lot to me.
Your super ridiculous, dumb, backwards name.
But, like I've alluded to a couple times already, I find this version of Michelangelo to be incredibly boring. Of the 4 turtles, he was the one that needed a solo adventure to give himself a more distinct personality more than anyone else, and unfortunately that didn't really happen. What the series made me realize, however, is the specific reason why this version of Michelangelo doesn't really work. And that is that they try to do too much with his character without committing fully to any of it, which ends up making his entire personality feeling very muddy. It's like they tried to subtly add the various traits of Michelangelo from throughout the franchise: the party dude, the jokester, the lovable idiot, and the friendly optimist. However, subtlety does not work for Michelangelo. He's meant to be rambunctious, and Mikey in Mutant Mayhem and Tails just doesn't really come across that way. I've also realized I'm just not a fan of his voice. The delivery of his lines always feel a little flat and just don't have the energy that I associate with Michelangelo as a character. Because this show was the perfect opportunity to shape Mikey into a stronger interpretation of the character but didn't really follow through, I have a feeling that this version of Michelangelo is going to remain my least favorite for a long time. But beyond all of my gripes with Mikey, I really enjoyed episode 8. I already loved the purple dragons from their introduction, so seeing them brought back was really fun, especially seeing the contrast in their dynamic with Raph and that with Mikey. Lee is also so much fun. I love how she's kind of awkward and dorky, and her interactions with Mikey are awesome. There is one part of this episode that looks really awkward, and that is the slow motion section. Because it's not really slow motion, they just turn down the number of drawings per frame, which honestly just feels lazy and doesn't look good. Otherwise, this was a really fun episode and led to some fun shenanigans. Episode 9, Splinter and April Fight a Goldfish, gave us insight into April and Splinter's dynamic, something that is sorely underrepresented in the franchise and only gets dedicated episodes in Rise of the TMNT. Honestly, their interactions in this episode are pretty reminiscent of the dynamic they have in Rise, which made this episode an absolute delight. The back and forth about the goldfish and the guinea pig specifically is a really good bit.
The goldfish is real. It's not safe in here for you.
No, my guinea pig was real too. Listen, this place is gonna flood.
But now I think it's important to address Splinter's voice. I feel like it was pretty obvious that Jackie Chan would likely not be voicing Splinter for this series, so him not being here was not surprising at all. They were pretty clever with the way they handled this issue by having him speak exclusively in Vermin for the sake of Scumbug. It was funny, and because he wasn't a major part of the Mechazoid story, it worked very well. However, making Brady Noon the voice of Splinter as Raph doing a voiceover for April's video didn't work nearly as well. It was a fine bit when it came to the storytelling parts, but even then it was incredibly convoluted how we were watching Raph's interpretation of Splinter telling a story to the Turtles and April, and also watching that story take place. There's just so many layers to it that it gets frustrating, especially when the Turtles interrupt Splinter's story for some banter that is completely made up by Raph. When it comes to episode 9, hearing this teenager put on a Batman voice as Splinter is really jarring, especially when he's giving a heartfelt speech about family. I would have much rather they recast Splinter for the sake of this show, bringing back Eric Bauza or Hoon Lee. I think having an actual Splinter voice as opposed to Brady Noon's Batman impression would have worked much better. That said, Splinter's voice, in terms of the way his dialogue is written, is very strong, and trying to look past the Batman voice and imagine Jackie Chan reading these lines instead, Splinter is very enjoyable in this episode. His secret rat worshippers crowning him the Rat King is super funny, and I adore the little flashbacks to the turtles as babies. Plus, this episode gives us more insight into what the East River 3 actually want to achieve, so overall I found episode 9 to be really enjoyable. I don't really have much to say about Donnie's adventure in episode 10, Donnie Goes Deep, because it's tied to the main narrative the least. It does allow us some insight into Wingnut as a character and her anxiety, while also exploring how Donnie is very left-brained and struggles with feelings sometimes. And honestly, the fact that they're fighting these random alligators that have this tragic backstory of being dumped into the sewer is kind of funny. As far as the main plot of this arc is concerned, we get flashbacks to the East River 3 discovering that the Pearl is on display at the Natural History Museum and their plans to work with Bad Bernie for their heist. I really enjoy the backstory given to these three and how their mutation cast them out from fish society just as mutants are, or at least were, cast out of human society. Episode 11, Leonardo Saddles Up, is a fun little episode that explores Leo learning that being an effective leader requires listening instead of just barking orders at people. The fact that Pete is being hunted because a random cop has childhood pigeon trauma is so random but hilarious. Pete himself is also a fun character. He's got such charm and is an absolute sweetheart like Metalhead. The fight between Mustang Sally and Leo is really fun to watch, and Sally is just a cool character in general. Something that honestly surprised me that went completely unacknowledged in the Pearl arc is the fact that Mustang Sally is literally pregnant. He mentions several times that he's going to be a father and that he has hundreds of babies on the way.
I'm not raising any of my hundreds of babies under this spear.
You're having a baby?
Babies, plural, like hundreds of them. That's how seahorses roll.
You know how else seahorses roll? Male pregnancy. When seahorses reproduce, the females actually deposit their eggs in what's called a brood pouch on the male's tail. The male seahorse is then the one that carries the pregnancy to term and delivers the hundreds of offspring. Which means that the entire time that Mustang Sally is kicking ass, he's also dealing with an entire pregnancy. This also means that Leo kicked a pregnant man in the stomach, which is not cool. Shame on you, Leo. The final episode, The Pearl, is our conclusion to the epic heist that's been laid out before us. As with the rest of the series, the fighting animation is so good. I especially adore the yacht fight with Goldfin. Seeing him bounce between the turtles and using their weapons against them is so satisfying. I also think it's hilarious that the only reason that half of the protagonists even knew about the Pearl heist is because the East River 3 got all defensive about being stopped when our heroes had no idea what they were talking about. The only thing that really bothered me about this episode was the fact that instead of Donnie staying behind to disarm the bomb, the one person who knows how to, they left behind 4 people who don't know how to disarm a bomb with quickly drawn instructions on how to do it. I get that we needed some drama and tension, and it's nice to have all 4 of the turtles together, but it really bothered me how they avoided the completely obvious solution of just having Donnie do it. Although I didn't enjoy the Pearl arc as much as the Mechazoid arc, it was still incredibly fun, and it's always really nice when TMNT creates original characters instead of recycling the same ones over and over again. So how does Tales of the TMNT compare to the other 4 iconic animated series from this franchise? Unfortunately, it was doomed to never reach the same heights as those shows from its creation. Tales is in a unique position compared to the other animated series. It's a spin-off of a movie. This means that the movie is essentially the starting point for the animated series, and watching Tales without having seen the movie takes away a lot of important context. Tales is dependent on mutant mayhem to exist, which means the films are the priority when it comes to this iteration of the Turtles. Because of this, the series isn't able to have the same impactful plot points present in other shows. To make a quick comparison, if we take a look at Disney's Tangled, it too had a spin-off series following the events of the movie called Tangled the Series, or Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure. I think it was renamed at some point. But anyway, the Tangled show has a fantastic narrative with world building and incredible character arcs that keep the audience engaged. Because of this, if Disney wanted to make a second Tangled movie, they would have 3 options. Number 1, make it a retelling of the story from the series, which would be convoluted and repetitive. Number 2, have the sequel movie be a separate timeline from the series, which is not at all satisfying narratively. Or number 3, make the new film take place after the events of the series, which would make the show required viewing because of how much happens in that story. And Marvel has made it incredibly clear why that does not work. In a series that has a super in-depth in-depth narrative like Tangled, returning to its original movie format doesn't work without making some huge sacrifices. This is why Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles never had the chance to tell a story with long-term implications. It isn't required viewing for the sequel, or at least it shouldn't be. Because of this, Tales is confined to its role as a more lighthearted filler adventure that may not even be canon. Which of course begs the question, did any of the events that happen in Tales of the TMNT actually occur? In the case of the Mechazoid story, we see Leo writing it out in his comic book, which is adorable, by the way. But this doesn't necessarily mean these things didn't happen, this could just be Leo's retelling. However, in one of the recaps, he states that his story is made up.
People assume me and my brothers have amazing adventures all the time. Well, we don't. We pretty much just go to school. So I made one up and put it in a comic.
The Pearl is even more obviously made up by the fact that Raph says the storm was boring and nothing exciting happened before diving into his own fabricated story for April's report.
Add in a fight, put some monsters in there maybe a heist or something. I don't know. Have Donnie get eaten. Hey!
None of that happened.
It makes complete sense why they did this because, like I mentioned earlier, messing with the continuity between movies could get really messy. However, if both of these stories are complete fabrications by Leo and Raph respectively, it doesn't really make sense that there is continuity between them. The Purple Dragons and Pigeon Pete especially are very present in the story and explicitly reference the events from the Mechazoid arc.
Did he tell you he stole my motorcycle?
I saw that bike. It was sick. I think it blew up.
What?
And of course, Bishop joining the EPF and Goldfin rescuing Bad Borny feel like a setup for the stories to be continued in the future. There's also the fact that these stories not being canon is just unsatisfying. I really enjoy a lot of these characters and how they fit into the Mutant Mayhem world, so for them to be complete fabrications is just disappointing. Again, I understand the approach of making the canonicity of this series open-ended so it doesn't conflict with the movies, but it's still frustrating. Now, I want to clarify that having lighthearted adventures without long-term implications isn't necessarily a bad thing. The 1987 animated series absolutely thrives on remaining episodic with only minor plot points from season to season, and it's an incredible show despite not having a super impactful story. It doesn't have that same focus on narrative as the other three animated shows, however, this grants it the freedom to do whatever it wants without being bogged down by an ever-present and overarching narrative it must adhere to. Most of its episodes are completely independent of one another and only require small pieces of continuity. Not to mention that part of the reason that TMNT 87 is so incredible is the fact that it is a huge foundation for what the franchise is today. So even if it may not be as good as the other animated series from a more objective standpoint, its legacy carries it to that same level of greatness. Tales having these isolated arcs and little adventures feels somewhat in line with TMNT 87's approach. However, because the 1987 series doesn't have the same narrative baggage nor the debate of canonicity, it doesn't carry the same frustration with it. And you could argue that what is and isn't canon doesn't really matter and just to have fun and enjoy the series, but that's not how my brain works. I like consistency and feeling like the content being created actually matters and has implications in the universe. But hey, that might just be me and may not hinder your enjoyment of the show at all. Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is an incredibly fun adventure that highlights the turtles individually, the exact thing that was missing from Mutant Mayhem, and has a lot of really fun moments and characters. However, as long as the show is a supplement to the movies, which is likely all it will ever be, it will never reach the same heights that the other TMNT shows have. Despite this, it's a fantastic show that is definitely worth checking out. And who knows, there's only 12 episodes out now, so maybe down the line it'll evolve into something bigger and even more impactful. Let me know what you all thought of Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I'll see y'all next time.